to Dialogue. China and Mongolia have signed a document of cooperation charting future course of growth in bilateral relations during President Ukhnaagiin Khurelsukh's two-day state visit to China. Coinciding with the visit is the launch of a new rail line from Mongolia to its southern neighbor over the weekend. What's a fresh impetus to further deepen ties between the two countries? Is Mongolia shifting from its long-time third neighbor policy to a new pragmatic foreign policy? To find out more, I'm glad to be joined by Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies, Pavel Felgenhauer, Russian defense analyst, and Einar Tangen, Senior Current Affairs commentator. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qingduo. Einar, I will start with you. China and Mongolia, they share a border which is more than 4,700 kilometers long. And also, China has been the largest source of investment and also the biggest trading partner for Mongolia for a consecutive 18 years. So how do you describe this bilateral relationship between the two countries?
Well, what's interesting about it is that Mongolia used to kind of be in between Russia and China. And to the extent that there were differences in policy, there was room for Mongolia to maneuver. But at this juncture, with both Russia and China seemingly on the same economic path and supporting each other politically, I think it's clear that Mongolia sees the writing on the wall. They understand the investment and the relationship that China and Mongolia have, and they're acting very pragmatically to make sure that there is, in fact, a good financial future for their country. In essence, acting in their interests.
Well, Xiyu, how do you characterize the relationship between China and Mongolia? It seems like a relationship is really, has to a large extent about economic trade and the investment between the two countries.
Yes, it's a very good question. On the surface, Mongolia and China has a very close economic ties simply because Mongolia's economy heavily rely on China's economy in many areas. For example, nowadays, China accounts for about 90% of Mongolia's export. And also, as a landlocked Mongolia, they heavily rely on China's Tianjin harbor as a major access to ocean. So in many cases, China is very important. However, if you look at a bigger picture, they have the similar, if not more, the similar important relation with Russia by the other aspects. For example, most of the energy imports heavily rely on Russia. So the importance of relation with China, relation with Russia, which one is important for Mongolia is a question of apple and beer. Which one is more delicious? In short, both are important. China recognized that very precisely. And as you know, with steady improving of China-Russia relation, and Mongolia, it seems to me, has got a more comfortable position dealing with both the big neighbor, north neighbor, Russia, and the southern neighbor, China.
Pavel, if you look at this relationship, from Moscow's point of view, Mongolia has practiced equal distance diplomacy between Moscow and Beijing. Both nations are very important. The two giant neighbors are basically equally important, as Xiyu pointed out, to Mongolia. So what's the view of Moscow in terms of this bilateral or trilateral relationship here?
And basically, Mongolia is a success story because the situation in Mongolia and around Mongolia is stable. There's a lot of trade, a lot of economic development, and there are problems, but they are being dealt with without basically things going bad. And it seems that everyone in Moscow and Beijing and Ulaanbaatar, they all would want the thing to continue as it is. And apparently it's going to continue. No one wants anything to go wrong, and it's going to continue as it is. That's the good news, basically, about Mongolia, and they want to keep it as it is right now. And apparently both Moscow and Beijing are happy enough with how the situation is developing.
So Xiyu, speak of this win-win relationship or win-win-win relationship among the three countries here. We noticed that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Mongolia in August, and then in September, you have the chairman of the Standing Committee of China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, also in Mongolia. And at the same time, basically, in the same month, I would say, the presidents from the two countries, met each other on the sidelines of the SCO summit, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Samarkand. So it seems there's a frequent interaction, frequent visit of each other. Now we have the president of Mongolia in Beijing. So tell us, why this is so, how do you explain this frequent visit of each other between the two countries?
Well, the frequent visit and exchanges between China and Mongolia you mentioned, plus the latest one at the very top level, really reflects the fast developing of the bilateral relation between Mongolia and China in a wide range of areas. Just now, we mentioned the very close ties in economic areas from export and imports and access to ocean and so on. However, if you look at the recent very close exchanges between the two countries, we will find the bilateral relation between the two has been widened and deepened in all dimensions, ranging from the political, economic, cultural, and strategic consultations. So in short, through this presidential state visit by Mongolia to Beijing, and based on the new signed treaties agreement between the two sides, China and Mongolia relation has been upgraded at a higher level of the comprehensive strategic cooperation partnership. So we can say, this is the latest achievement of the win-win results between the two countries. And if you look at the bigger picture, as I mentioned about, this bilateral win-win results will certainly input more momentum for the trilateral win-win result, simply because the further prosperities and development in Mongolia will also contribute to Mongolia and Russia. For example, the bigger market for Mongolia is a good news for Russia, not only for China, and vice versa. So basically, because of the three countries has been on the track of the positive dynamics, each of the bilateral progresses will mean the trilateral benefits.
Trilateral benefits from the interaction between basically two of them.
We call it win-win-win results.
Right, trilateral wins here for everybody. And we know in 2020, during the pandemic, control efforts, Mongolia donated 30,000 sheep to the Chinese side to help them against, to fight this COVID pandemic. And that created a lot of goodwill from the Chinese public. And of course, now the two presidents, they met each other, they signed witnessed basically cooperation agreements being signed. And just ahead of the state visit, Mongolian side also launched a new rail line to connect to its southern neighbor, China here. And so tell us, what does this rail line mean, and what is the purpose, and why they are launching these new rail lines? Probably more are coming to connect the two countries.
Well, obviously, Mongolia has two main exports, whether it's livestock or minerals, and the rail line is going to help that. I mean, it's a landlocked country, If it's going to export, it needs to do so through China. I mean, it doesn't have to, but any other connection would be very long over land. So Mongolia, as I said before, acting very pragmatically. There's still some lingering issues about Inner Mongolia and things like that, but they've seen their way clear, and they understand quite, it's very clear to them that at this juncture, with China and Russia seemingly together for a long period of time, especially with these gas lines being put in and things like this, which are going to be going through Mongolia, this is something that they can count on, economics. And today, in this world, there's a lack of trust. One way to build trust is to make commitments. And I think this is what Mongolia is responding to. They feel more comfortable if there's this gas line between Russia and China that's going through Mongolia to, in essence, put their eggs in one basket and say, look, we're going to continue our trade with China. We're going to expand it. It's their #1 trade relationship, as we've discussed before, but they're doubling down on it. And as I said, this is all about trust. And unfortunately, I wish this was happening in other nations, not just Mongolia.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xiyu, again here, if you look at this, the development of Mongolia over the past basically 2 decades, they have become this, fast-growing hotspots for minerals, in particular export. If you look at their trade with China, a large portion of that is all kinds of minerals, valuable minerals. Tell us, I mean, this trade obviously is a win-win. So what does it mean to China, and what does it mean to Mongolia?
Well, I think China's economic ties with Mongolia does not only mean about what it is nowadays, for example, mineral exports and so on, but also means something modernized tomorrow, because the bilateral relation, if you look at the details of the bilateral relation between China and Mongolia, in many projects, such a sustainable development and inclusive development will certainly push forward Mongolia's modernization progress. And I think in the near future, Mongolia economy will be in the fast track on the modernization with their steady growth. And China will like to continue to contribute China's role to this process. But the more important thing is China-Mongolia relation has widened into the political and the security areas. And because both of the countries want to contribute to the peace and the stabilities in this region, simply because the peace and stability in this region is the precondition for both of the country. Without that precondition, there won't be sustainable and reliable development both for Mongolia and China. That is why in recent years, not only the fast development of economic ties, but also fast growing of cooperation in political and security dialogues and changes between the two countries. That is also contributed to the more solid base for the bilateral relation.
Well, Pavel, we are seeing this, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and then from the Mongolian side, they have this priority road development strategy. We are seeing the connection, or the two strategies are connecting with each other. And also you see China, Mongolia, and Russia, there's economic corridor among the three countries. And actually in September, there's a agreement between the three leaders to extend for 5 years the development plan of the establishing of this economic corridor. So why is this so important? Are we talking about economic integration as well as probably to a large extent infrastructure connectivity here?
Yes, and that's very important for all sides and very important for Russia, of course, because when the present Ukrainian crisis is somehow resolved, it's clear that Russian relations with the West, with Europe, will never be the same as they were a year ago. For Russia, it's very important to build this, Europe after this crisis most likely will not be buying Russian natural gas in the same volumes as it did before. And we need to send it other places, and building a pipeline through Mongolia seems the good option. And it's a strategic option for Russia. It's also strategic for Mongolia and for China, connecting these three countries together more permanently. So yes, this is a strategic decision made in the capitals of the three countries to further stabilize the situation. It's already stable, that's good. I mean, it's not like say, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of serious big problems right now possibly arising. There are problems in the other places, outer world, and that's not could influence badly the situation, but in and around Mongolia. But right now, that's not the case, and everyone wants to keep it as it is right now. And it's going to be a further building up of the connections between the three countries and through Mongolia between Russia and China, which will be there for the coming decades. And I believe, hopefully, everyone understands that is for everyone's benefit, and that's how it's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anna, if you look at this economic integration between China, Mongolia, and Russia, and also in particular, it's the infrastructure connectivity. I mean, it's a long term. It's a strategic in a sense. It's will benefit probably countries and regions beyond the three countries. Let's say Central Asian countries and even to European countries here, because that's also part of this. Long rail line from China to part of Europe.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to always assume that all roads lead to Europe. Europe right now is in a very difficult situation manufacturing-wise because of inflation, and especially because of the availability of energy. So at this juncture, people should start thinking about Central Asia as a destination, as a market in itself, and stop thinking about it as some sort of through passage to. It would be wonderful for everybody involved if, in fact, Europe does become part of this kind of emerging global bloc that includes the South, the developing South, and also Central Asia. So, it's sometimes difficult to realize that we've changed the paradigm, and that at this juncture, people have to think of the world in different terms. You look at China and the number of trade relationships it has, and where the growth is in the economy. It's in Asia. Obviously, China is a central part of that, but they're trying to extend that into Central Asia. This is going to be very, very attractive. We'll see what happens to Europe. But increasingly, if you look at the map of the world, you'll see very clearly that it's not the US and Europe that is expanding their economic influence. It is really the rest of the world deciding that they want to have choices. They want to take their own sovereignty. They want to make their own financial decisions. And this is nowhere more clear than in Mongolia.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xiyu, if you look at this, we say this economic corridor between the three countries, and for China, it's important in the sense of like energy security, because China can import mineral resources from Mongolia and energy, oil and gas from Russia. And of course, China means probably the greatest market now for Mongolian goods and other resources, and also for Russia too.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in short term, we will look and enjoy the connectivities between China, Mongolia, in the beyond Russia. We call it infrastructure connectivities. But in long run, the constant and sustainable connectivities contributed by the three countries will certainly make a further integration of economies among the three. And the integration is actually the historical trend of the globe. So the trilateral integration is either the part of the global integration and also the contributors and the momentum for the global integration. So the connectivities now contains both technical meetings and strategic meetings in the global trends. And also for China, we determined to develop further relations by all dimensions with Mongolia. Is designed to develop our all-dimensional partnership in the globe. We determined to set up global partnership, and the global the partnership between China and Mongolia is one of the important part. So through this visit, we successfully achieved a lot, and I believe with the following implementation of the agreements that the two sides has signed, with the continued efforts, and the partnership between Mongolia and China will be strengthened. That will contribute to the trilateral partnership between our three, and as well to China's global partnership system.
Mm-hmm. Well, Pavel, speak of the infrastructure connectivity. We are seeing the construction of a new gas pipeline from Russia to China, the Western Siberia region of Russia. We call it, people call it the Power of Siberia 2 power pipeline. So what does it mean to say to China, to Mongolia, and to Russia here?
Well, it's important for all, maybe mostly important right now for Russia, to find a way to connect to its very large natural gas deposits in Western Siberia, in the north of Western Siberia and Yamal, to connect them to other markets than the European market that they were connected before, which right now has created a lot of problems in Europe, but also problems for Russia too. So that's a very important strategic decision for Moscow to divert its exports of natural gas to the east from the west. That's when Mongolia seems a very good way to go through Mongolia, to put this natural gas through Mongolia. That could be important for Mongolia, but mostly, of course, it's important for Russia and also to China. Mongolia will benefit from it. Stability and just simply economically, though I wouldn't say that this would be very decisive for Mongolia, but for Russia, it may be a very decisive move as Russian-Western relations continue to deteriorate to a military almost standoff right now. And that's, of course, Russia's main concern right now. Russia is looking what's happening in its western part with most concern, and apparently happy that in the east there's stability and partnership.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xiyu speak of is solid relationship, infrastructure, trade here, win-win cooperation, and of course, Anna mentioned about lack of trust, partly because of the Ukraine crisis that creates some challenges for relationships, obviously. So what do you think the two countries, what are their policies and attitudes toward this crisis, and in what way it might somehow impact their say, foreign policy or their cooperation here?
Well, I believe both China and Mongolia insist on the two principles on the strengthening of a bilateral relation. One, for equally mutually benefited, and two, such a bilateral mutually benefited cooperation won't never ever targeting at any third party. And as our colleagues mentioned above, nowadays global-wide lacking of this lack of trust. Yes, we understand that, and we have no way. We have to rely on the time with our constant non-targeting at any third parties cooperation, the time will support China's position, say, yes, China has never targeted at any third party for conduct bilateral relations with any country like Mongolia or Russia. And also, I think if you look at the bigger picture of the recent China's diplomacy, especially the presidential diplomacy, during the 6 days in South Asia, when President Xi Jinping was there, he met 19 state leaders. And recently in Beijing, including Mongolia President Xi has met with 6 state leaders. All of the bilateral summits are designed to, as I mentioned, to build up global partnership for everyone. And with our constant efforts, and more and more countries will recognize and believe, yes, China's any bilateral and multilateral engagement always focus on the win-win and mutually benefited, and never make use of the cooperation as a weapon to target at any third party.
Mm-hmm. Well, and briefly, obviously, I mean, for countries, let's say relatively smaller countries like Mongolia, in terms of size and population, they would, I would say, they would not like to be pressured to choose a side. They want to maintain relationship with both probably Washington, Beijing, and Moscow.
Well, it goes far beyond just small countries. I mean, you can go look at Indonesia, many other countries across Africa, South America. They do not want to be pulled into issues, especially things like Ukraine, which they see as perhaps a preventable conflict that really has nothing to do with them, but for which they are suffering. So increasingly, as I said before, you're seeing this divide between the developing, emerging South, the Central Asia versus the developed global North. And it's not just in terms of, trade and things like this. You can really see it in the economics. I mean, looking forward, look at the projections by the IMF in 2023. Really, the only bright star of the world economically is going to be in ASEAN and China. Asia is, the economic activity is shifting towards Asia, and this is an economic reality. And unfortunately, it's taking some countries, especially in the developed world, some time to adjust. Well,
cooperation and not confrontation probably is the way forward. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time and insight. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qingduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.